The obese girl felt invisible to the world until the mountain man carved a path right to her heart. The frontier town of Harper's Ridge sat nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian wilderness in the autumn of 1794, a collection of weathered cabins and rough-hewn structures that served as the last bastion of civilization before the untamed West. Here, in this place where survival mattered more than sentiment, lived Eleanor Whitmore, a girl of 22 summers who carried both physical weight and the crushing burden of being unseen. Eleanor had arrived 3 years prior with her uncle's family after her parents succumbed to fever back in Pennsylvania. She was a large girl, her frame substantial, her body round and soft, in a world that valued the lean and hardy. In the harsh reality of frontier life, where every person needed to contribute labor and where beauty was measured in terms of utility, Eleanor found herself relegated to the shadows of existence. She worked in her uncle's trading post, managing the ledgers and organizing supplies with a quiet efficiency that went largely unnoticed. Customers would enter the dim store, their eyes sliding past her substantial figure as if she were merely another piece of furniture. Young men came to purchase goods, their gazes seeking her cousin Martha, slender and fair, while Eleanor counted coins and wrapped parcels with hands that trembled only when she allowed herself to feel. The town's women were no kinder. Their whispers followed Eleanor through the muddy streets like persistent shadows. "Poor dear," they would murmur with false sympathy. "Such a shame she lets herself go like that." As if her body were a choice, a moral failing, rather than simply the vessel that housed her considerable spirit and sharp mind. Eleanor had learned to make herself smaller in ways that had nothing to do with her physical form. She spoke softly, moved carefully, and tried desperately not to take up too much space in a world that had already decided she occupied far too much of it. She ate her meals alone in the back room of the trading post, not from hunger, but from habit, each bite a quiet rebellion against the emptiness that gnawed at her far more viciously than any appetite. In the evenings, when her work was done, Eleanor would climb the hill behind the settlement and sit among the pines, looking out toward the endless mountains that rolled like frozen waves toward the western horizon. There, alone with the wind and the fading light, she would allow herself to dream of a life where she was seen, truly seen, not as a burden or an embarrassment, but as a woman worthy of love and belonging. Jeremiah Stone came down from the high country on a crisp October morning, leading a mule laden with beaver pelts and deerskins. He was a mountain man in every sense, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard the color of chestnuts, and eyes that held the gray-blue depths of winter sky. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent more years among the peaks and valleys than in the company of civilized folk. He had lived in the wilderness for 8 years, since he was 21, after a disagreement with his father's plans for his future had sent him seeking freedom in the untamed lands. Jeremiah had learned the ways of the trappers and hunters, had spent winters in solitude that would have driven lesser men to madness, and had developed a profound respect for the mountains that shaped every aspect of his existence. At 29, he was considered strange by the townspeople, too comfortable in silence, too direct in his speech, too unconcerned with the social niceties that governed frontier society. He came to town twice a year to trade his furs and replenish his supplies, spending no more time than necessary among buildings and people before returning to his beloved wilderness. When Jeremiah entered the Whitmore trading post that October day, Eleanor was standing on a stool, reaching for a bolt of cloth on a high shelf. She heard the door open and the heavy footfalls, and she hurried to descend, her movements made clumsy by nervousness. Her foot caught on her skirt, and she tumbled backward with a small cry of alarm. Jeremiah moved with the swift instinct of a man accustomed to reacting to danger. He crossed the space in 3 strides and caught Eleanor before she could hit the floor, his strong arm steadying her substantial weight as if it were nothing at all. For a moment they stood frozen in that awkward intimacy, Eleanor's face burning with mortification. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, already preparing for the inevitable awkwardness of his retreat. But Jeremiah did not immediately release her. Instead, he looked at her, truly looked at her, and his gray-blue eyes held neither judgment nor pity. "You're welcome, miss," he said in a voice that carried the roughness of disuse, but also unexpected gentleness. That was a near thing. These old floors are treacherous. He set her carefully on her feet, his hands lingering just a moment to ensure her stability, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. This stranger had not looked through her or past her. He had looked at her. I need to fetch my uncle," Eleanor stammered, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "No need to trouble him if you can help me," Jeremiah said, pulling a crumpled list from his coat pocket. "I know what I need, just someone to gather it while I see to my mule." And so began an unusual afternoon. While Eleanor's uncle dozed in the back room, recovering from a morning spent sampling whiskey with other merchants, Eleanor worked with the mountain man to fill his order. She moved through the store with quiet confidence, knowing exactly where each item resided, and Jeremiah watched her with an attention that made her acutely self-conscious. "You have a good system here," he observed, noting how she had organized the goods by category and frequency of use. "I manage the inventory," Eleanor said, surprised to find herself speaking with something approaching ease. "My uncle isn't much for organization." "Organization saves time and frustration," Jeremiah replied. "In the mountains, knowing exactly where your supplies are can mean the difference between comfort and hardship. Sometimes between life and death." They fell into conversation as naturally as streams finding their course downhill. Jeremiah spoke of the wilderness with a reverence that captivated Eleanor, the way dawn broke over the peaks, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, the profound silence of a winter forest after fresh snowfall, the satisfaction of living by one's own skill and determination. Eleanor, in turn, found herself sharing things she had never voiced aloud. She spoke of her love for numbers and patterns, how she found beauty in the ordered columns of the ledger books. She mentioned the books she borrowed from the minister's small library, her hunger for stories of distant places and different lives. "You're an educated woman, then," Jeremiah said, and it was a statement of fact, not surprise. "My father believed girls should read and cipher as well as boys," Eleanor said softly. "He said ignorance was a burden no one should have to bear." "Sounds like a wise man." When all the supplies were gathered and tallied, Jeremiah paid in clean silver coins, not the barter goods most trappers used. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door and turned back. "I'll be staying at the boarding house for a few days," he said, "getting my mule reshod, having some harness work done. Would you show me that hill you climb in the evenings, the one behind the settlement?" Eleanor's breath caught. How did he know about that? Then she realized he was a tracker, a man trained to notice details that others missed. Yes, she heard herself say. "Tomorrow at dusk?" Jeremiah nodded, something that might have been a smile moving beneath his beard. Tomorrow at dusk. The next evening, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Eleanor climbed the familiar path with Jeremiah Stone walking beside her. She had spent the entire day in an agony of anticipation and dread, certain that he would not come, or that if he did, it would be from politeness rather than genuine interest. But he arrived at the trading post just as the light began to golden, and he fell into step beside her with the comfortable silence of someone who understood that not all moments required words. They reached Eleanor's spot, a flat outcropping of rock that offered a panoramic view of the rolling mountains beyond the settlement. Jeremiah stood at the edge, his gaze sweeping across the landscape with the appreciation of a man reading a familiar and beloved text. "This is fine country," he said finally. "You picked well." "It's the only place I feel at peace," Eleanor admitted, the words emerging before she could stop them. She immediately regretted the confession, certain it revealed too much of her loneliness. But Jeremiah simply nodded. "I understand that. For me, it's a particular valley about 3 days north of here. There's a meadow that fills with wildflowers in spring, and elk come down from the higher elevations at dawn. I built a cabin there 2 years ago. It's where I winter." They sat on the sun-warmed rock, and Jeremiah asked Eleanor about her life, her dreams, her thoughts on matters both profound and trivial. And wonder of wonders, he listened to her answers with genuine attention, asking follow-up questions that showed he was truly interested in understanding her perspective. Eleanor had never experienced this before, this sensation of being heard, of having her words valued. She found herself speaking with increasing confidence, her usual hesitation falling away like a shed skin. "Why did you ask me up here?" she finally dared to ask as the light turned purple and the first stars appeared. Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the darkening mountains. "Because yesterday in the store I saw something that most folks seem to miss. I saw a woman of substance, and I don't mean that in the way you might think. I saw intelligence in your eyes, efficiency in your movements, and a kindness in how you dealt with a rough stranger. I saw someone who had made herself useful and competent in a world that probably doesn't appreciate either quality enough." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. It doesn't bother you? The way I look?" Jeremiah turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the dim light. "Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor? In the mountains, you learn what truly matters. A person's worth isn't measured in pounds or inches. It's measured in courage, in honesty, in the ability to face hardship and persist. It's measured in kindness and intelligence and 100 other things that have nothing to do with the particular shape of their body." He paused. "In 8 years alone, I learned that loneliness comes from not being known, not from being alone. I suspect you've been lonely in a crowded room more times than I've been lonely on a mountaintop." The truth of his words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no move to hide them. "I've been invisible my whole life," she whispered, "even to myself sometimes." Jeremiah reached out and took her hand, large and work-worn, fitting perfectly in his own. Then let me be the mirror that shows you what I see, if you'll allow it. Jeremiah Stone extended his stay in Harper's Ridge from 3 days to 2 weeks, a decision that set tongues wagging throughout the small settlement. He was seen daily in the company of Eleanor Whitmore, and the sight of the respected mountain man and the substantial girl walking together, talking animatedly, sitting on the hill at sunset, caused no small amount of speculation and gossip. Eleanor's aunt, a thin woman with a sour disposition, took her niece aside one evening. "You're making a spectacle of yourself," she hissed. "That man is toying with you. Surely you can see that. Men like Jeremiah Stone don't court girls like you. He's probably making a wager with his trapper friends." The words were designed to wound, and they found their mark. Eleanor spent a sleepless night wrestling with doubt, all her old insecurities rising like specters in the darkness. When Jeremiah arrived the next day, she met him with red-rimmed eyes and a stiff posture. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, his perceptiveness cutting through her attempted facade. "Why are you really spending time with me?" Eleanor demanded, her voice breaking. "People are talking. They say you're making sport of me, that you're amusing yourself before you return to the mountains." Jeremiah's face darkened with anger, not at her, but at the cruelty of others. "Come with me," he said simply, offering his hand. He led her not to their usual spot, but to the boarding house where he was staying. From his room he retrieved a leather journal, worn and stained from travel, filled with page after page of his careful handwriting. "I've kept a journal since I went into the mountains," he explained, sitting beside her on a bench outside the boarding house. "I write about my days, my thoughts, the things I observe. I started it because I worried I might forget how to use words if I spent too much time without human company." He opened to a page dated just 2 days after their first meeting. "Read this," he said, handing her the journal. Eleanor's hands trembled as she began to read his words. "I met a woman today who reminded me why I might want to leave the mountains. Not because she is extraordinary in the ways that society values, but because she is extraordinary in the ways that matter to the soul. She has eyes that hold both sadness and strength, a mind that organizes chaos into order, and a gentleness that the world has tried and failed to crush. I find myself thinking about what it would mean to be known by someone like her, to build a life with someone who understands both solitude and connection." Eleanor looked up, tears streaming freely now. "You wrote this about me?" "Every word true," Jeremiah confirmed. "Eleanor, I've lived alone by choice for 8 years. I've turned down invitations from 3 different women who made their interest known. I stayed alone because I never found anyone with whom I wanted to share my life. Until you." He took her hands in his. "I don't know what cruel words your aunt spoke to you, but I can guess their general shape. I'm here to tell you that she's wrong. I'm not toying with you. I'm courting you with the serious intention of asking you to be my wife if you'll have me." "But Eleanor began. "You're intelligent and kind and capable," Jeremiah interrupted firmly. "You're patient and observant, and you have a laugh that makes me want to spend my life finding ways to hear it. You're strong enough to survive in a world that has been unkind to you, which tells me you're strong enough to thrive in a world that treats you well. That's what you are, Eleanor. That's all that matters to me." Eleanor collapsed against him, sobbing, and Jeremiah held her with steady strength, letting her release years of accumulated pain and loneliness. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back to look at him. "I don't know how to be loved," she confessed. "I don't know if I can believe this is real." "Then let me teach you," Jeremiah said softly. "Let me show you every day that you're worthy of love until you can believe it yourself. I'm a patient man, Eleanor. I've tracked elk for weeks without losing their trail. I can be patient while you learn to trust this, to trust me." Over the following week, Jeremiah set about proving his intentions to Eleanor and to the skeptical town. He spoke openly about his plans to make Eleanor his wife. He introduced her to the blacksmith and the saddler as his intended, speaking with pride about her abilities and character. When Eleanor's aunt made a snide comment in his hearing, he faced the woman with cold courtesy. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've survived bear attacks, blizzards that could freeze a man solid, and winters that would break weaker men. I've learned to read the land, the weather, and the hearts of those I meet. Your niece is a woman of exceptional quality, and I consider myself fortunate that she might accept me. If you cannot see her worth, that speaks to your poverty of vision, not to any failing of hers." The aunt had no response, and word of the mountain man's defense of Eleanor spread quickly through the settlement. As the leaves turned to flame and fell from the trees, Jeremiah and Eleanor spent every possible moment together. He taught her to track game, to read the subtle signs of weather in the sky, to move quietly through the forest. She taught him about the books she loved, shared her observations about human nature gleaned from years of careful watching, and showed him the beauty she found in patterns and numbers. One evening, as they sat on their rock overlooking the darkening mountains, Jeremiah spoke the words that would change everything. "Come with me, Eleanor. Come to the mountains. I have a cabin small but solid, with a stone fireplace and a good roof. There's a stream nearby for water, game in the woods, and space for a garden come spring. It's isolated. True, the nearest neighbors are a day's ride away. But it's beautiful, and it's peaceful, and it could be ours together." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "You're asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to build a life with me," Jeremiah said. "In the mountains, away from people who judge you for all the wrong reasons. A place where your intelligence and your strength and your kindness are exactly what's needed. A place where you can be yourself, fully yourself, without apology." He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "I know it's not an easy life. Winters are hard, and there are real dangers. You'd be leaving everything familiar. But Eleanor, in those mountains, you wouldn't be invisible. You'd be essential. You'd be cherished. You'd be home." Eleanor looked out at the mountains, those peaks that had called to her for years, representing freedom and possibility. She thought about her life in Harper's Ridge, the constant whispers, the pitying glances, the crushing weight of being tolerated rather than treasured. She thought about her uncle's trading post, where she worked without recognition or appreciation. She thought about her aunt's cruelty and her cousin's casual dismissal. Then she thought about Jeremiah, this unexpected man who had seen her when no one else could, who had carved a path through her defenses and found the woman she had hidden even from herself. She thought about the way he listened when she spoke, the respect in his eyes, the gentle strength of his hands. She thought about being known, truly known, by someone who valued her for exactly who she was. "Yes," she said, the word emerging with surprising strength. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll go to the mountains with you." Jeremiah pulled her into his arms, and they sat together as darkness fell completely and the stars emerged in their countless thousands, bright and clear in the mountain air. The wedding took place a week later, performed by the settlement's minister in a simple ceremony witnessed by a handful of townspeople. Eleanor wore a new dress that Jeremiah had purchased from the store, made of soft blue wool that matched the autumn sky. He had commissioned it without her knowledge, working with the seamstress to ensure it fit properly, and Eleanor had wept when he presented it to her, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone cared enough to see to her comfort and dignity. Eleanor's uncle, shamed by Jeremiah's obvious devotion and perhaps recognizing his own failure toward his niece, gave Eleanor a generous sum of money as a wedding gift. "For supplies," he mumbled gruffly. "Mountain living is hard on a woman." Eleanor's aunt said nothing, but her sour expression spoke volumes. The townspeople who attended were few, but they came with genuine goodwill, the minister and his wife, the blacksmith, who respected Jeremiah's skill with animals and metal, a few of the traders who had worked with Jeremiah over the years. Even Martha, Eleanor's cousin, embraced her with what seemed like sincere warmth. "I hope you'll be happy," Martha whispered. "Truly I do. You deserve it." They left Harper's Ridge on a crisp November morning, Jeremiah leading 2 mules laden with supplies, and Eleanor riding a gentle mare that Jeremiah had purchased and trained specifically for her. The journey took 3 days, winding through increasingly wild country, following trails that only someone with Jeremiah's knowledge could navigate. Eleanor discovered that her body, which had seemed burdensome in town, had unexpected strengths in the wilderness. She could sit a horse for long hours without complaint. She could set up camp efficiently, organizing their supplies with the same skill she had brought to the trading post. Her hands, accustomed to work, adapted quickly to new tasks. On the 3rd evening, they crested a ridge, and Jeremiah pointed to a valley below. "There," he said softly. "That's home." Eleanor saw a small cabin nestled against the tree line at the edge of a meadow. Smoke rising from its chimney, Jeremiah had arranged for a friend to come stock firewood and prepare the place for their arrival. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks touched with snow, and the valley held that particular quality of light that Eleanor had only glimpsed from her rock in Harper's Ridge. "It's perfect," she breathed. The cabin was indeed small, one main room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace, and windows that let in generous light. But it was clean and well built, with shelves that Eleanor immediately began organizing and a table where she could see them sharing meals. There was even a small collection of books, Jeremiah's own treasures from before his mountain years. That first night, as they lay together in the loft bed, Eleanor whispered into the darkness, "I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream." Jeremiah pulled her close. "Then I'll spend every morning showing you it's real." The winter that followed was hard in the ways Jeremiah had warned, but it was also transcendently beautiful. Eleanor learned to set snares for rabbits, to tan hides, to render fat for candles and soap. She discovered she had a gift for tracking game, her patient observation skills translating perfectly to reading signs in the forest. She could predict weather with increasing accuracy and learned which plants would heal and which would harm. But more than the practical skills, Eleanor learned something far more precious. She learned to take up space without apology. In the mountains, her strength was an asset, her endurance a necessity. When she and Jeremiah worked together to haul water or cut firewood or process a deer, her contributions were vital, and Jeremiah made sure she knew it. "You're a natural mountain woman," he told her one day, watching her expertly butcher a rabbit. "You've taken to this life better than many who were born to it." Eleanor looked up, her hands bloodied from honest work, her face flushed from exertion, and felt something bloom in her chest, pride in herself, hard-earned and real. The isolation that might have driven others to despair became, for Eleanor, a kind of freedom. Here there were no whispers, no pitying glances, no constant measurement against impossible standards. There was only the work to be done, the beauty to be appreciated, and Jeremiah's steady presence and affection. They talked for hours in the evenings, sitting by the fire while wind howled outside. Jeremiah shared stories of his years alone, and Eleanor spoke of her childhood, her parents, the dreams she had buried. They read books aloud to each other, debated philosophy and politics, laughed at shared jokes, and grew together in the profound intimacy that comes from being genuinely known. Spring came to the valley with explosive beauty wildflowers carpeting the meadow, birds returning in raucous flocks, the stream swelling with snowmelt. Eleanor planted a garden with seeds she had brought from Harper's Ridge and others that Jeremiah had traded for, her hands working the dark soil with deep satisfaction. One morning in late May, Eleanor woke feeling strange, and by afternoon she was certain. She told Jeremiah that evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. "We're going to have a child," she said, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Jeremiah's face transformed with joy. He gathered her into his arms, and Eleanor felt him tremble. "A child," he whispered, "our child. Eleanor, you've given me more happiness than I ever thought possible." The pregnancy progressed through the summer and into autumn. Jeremiah hovered with careful attention, making sure Eleanor didn't overwork, bringing her special treats from his hunting expeditions, tender cuts of meat, fresh berries, once even a rare honeycomb. He read to her in the evenings, his deep voice soothing, and held her when pregnancy discomforts made sleep difficult. In late November, as snow began to dust the peaks, a midwife from the distant settlement summoned by Jeremiah 2 weeks earlier arrived to wait with them. Eleanor labored through a long night and into dawn, Jeremiah holding her hand, whispering encouragements, never leaving her side. Their daughter was born with the sunrise, her cry strong and healthy. They named her Sarah, after Eleanor's mother, and she had Jeremiah's gray-blue eyes and Eleanor's dark hair. Holding her daughter for the first time, Eleanor wept not from pain or exhaustion, but from overwhelming gratitude. This child would never know the cruelty Eleanor had endured. She would be raised in mountains that cared nothing for arbitrary standards of beauty, by parents who would teach her that her worth came from her character, her kindness, her strength. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered to Jeremiah, who sat beside her, gazing at their daughter with wonder. "For what?" "For seeing me," Eleanor said simply. "For carving a path to my heart when I thought I would always be invisible." Jeremiah kissed her forehead gently. "Eleanor, you were never invisible. You just needed someone who knew how to look." The cabin had grown. Jeremiah had added a room for Sarah and another for the son James, who had arrived 2 years after his sister. A small barn now stood beside the cabin, housing chickens, a milk cow, and the horses. The garden flourished under Eleanor's capable hands, and she had even started keeping bees, having discovered an unexpected talent for the work. Twice a year they made the journey to Harper's Ridge for supplies and to visit Eleanor's uncle, who had softened considerably after seeing his niece's happiness. Her aunt had passed away the previous winter, and Eleanor found she could forgive the woman now, understanding that her cruelty had come from her own unhappiness. But they always returned eagerly to their valley, to their mountains, to their life. Eleanor had changed in these 5 years, but not in the ways the world might have expected or demanded. She had not become smaller. If anything, her body had expanded with childbearing and the solid muscle built from mountain living. But she stood taller, moved with confidence, and looked people directly in the eye. The sadness that had haunted her gaze in Harper's Ridge had been replaced by contentment and quiet joy. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Sarah and James play in the meadow, Eleanor turned to Jeremiah. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing me, taking on a wife and children, when you could have stayed free in the mountains?" Jeremiah looked at her with surprise. "Eleanor, my love, you've never understood. Before you, I wasn't free. I was alone. There's a difference. Freedom isn't the absence of bonds. It's choosing the bonds that matter, the ones that make life richer rather than smaller." He took her hand, work-worn and strong, and kissed it. "You and our children didn't trap me. You freed me from a loneliness I didn't even fully recognize until I met you." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, watching her children laugh as they chased each other through the wild flowers, and she thought about the girl she had been invisible, lonely, convinced of her own unworthiness. She thought about how close she had come to spending her entire life in that shadow. "I love our life," she said softly. "As do I," Jeremiah replied. "Every single day of it." As darkness fell and the first stars emerged, they called their children inside. Sarah came running, followed by James, both of them flushed and happy. Eleanor gathered them close, breathing in their sweet, wild scent, pine sap and sunshine and pure childhood, and felt a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. She had been invisible once, lost in a world that couldn't see past the surface, but Jeremiah had found her anyway, had carved a path straight to her heart, and had shown her that true love isn't about changing to meet someone else's standards. It's about being seen exactly as you are and being treasured for it. In the mountains, Eleanor Whitmore Stone was invisible no longer. She was essential, cherished, and finally, completely home.